And it's going to be that way with airlines. It's going to be that way with aerospace and defense suppliers too, like us. So what can keep us from succeeding? All right, this is my official non-GPP slide. It's official non-GPP. Now, in good times and bad times, you got to have the right people, right? Everybody knows that. What I will tell you is that when you're going through a period of change, you're trying to reshape your company, like getting behind continuous improvement and the processes we're trying to put in place. The best people are going to get it, realize it, get on board, they're your team, you're going to go. Some people aren't going to be able to understand it, but they're worth working with and try and convert them. Others are going to fight, they're going to need to go, and there's a process within GPP to help that along, if you will. But the worst is this one. I call them the saboteurs. They're the ones that say they agree with what you're doing, but they're really trying to sabotage you. So find me a GPP process that helps you find those people and help them self-select themselves out of the organization. I don't know why people do that, but I've seen it too many times. I'm old now. I've seen this a lot, and you've got to find them, hunt them down, and help them leave the organization. It may be the toughest thing you do because it's time-consuming, but it's important. It keeps coming back to leadership, doesn't it? It's a leadership challenge. It really is. All right, now let's talk about innovation. We've talked about vision. More than ever, innovation is your threat and your opportunity. How many read the book Innovator's Dilemma? Yeah, great book, great book. It really is a scary book as well. Over the last 250 years, technology change has been the prominent reason why companies have failed. They just couldn't keep up with it. And if you ask me why, my answer is this: leadership. It didn't foresee the change, embrace the change, communicate the need, and lead the change. Pretty simple. It's happening as we sit here today in company after company around the world. They're threatened by change, technology usually. They're not able to deal with it. Everybody know who that is? Steve Ballmer. He's going to take a beating here in the press over the next couple of months. This just came out this weekend, talking about his inability to lead innovative change within Microsoft. I don't think it's fair, because Microsoft is doing a lot of fantastic things. They really are. But in the areas where they have the greatest visibility, like mobile communications, they've really floundered badly. The more successful the company, the harder it is to innovate anew, right? The more success you have, the harder it is to change. And innovation is the CEO's job. It's not some guy sitting down below. It's the CEO's job to drive it. We have a lot of excellent positions in our company today. We should worry about them because many of them are threatened by technology change. We are responding. I just ask, are we bold enough? I'd like to think we are. But this is a case for leadership and courage to keep your company out in front. Listen carefully, watch carefully, help people, help your leaders with vision. IBM, Thomas Watson Sr., one of the really great leaders. He had the challenge of keeping that company together and keep it moving forward during the Great Depression in the 1930s. Very high integrity in all of his dealings with others. They innovated continuously through that period, and some say he had the greatest willpower ever to see their way through this depression. He could not believe that this country would not come through that Great Depression and come out a great company, and he was going to position his company to win. Saw a headline in the Wall Street Journal back in 2009 saying that despite cutbacks, smart firms are investing in developing their leadership. Very true. And it's always been true. Great companies are constantly developing leadership, and it doesn't matter what the economic conditions are. In fact, the worse it is, the more you better be developing leaders, right? Something good to talk about. Is that what IBM was doing? I think it was. Well, you know, Thomas Sr. stepped aside and let his son take over the business back in 1956, a very interesting cultural difference. Dad was not a fan of this thing called computers, you know, electronic data processing. What's that all about? But Tom Jr. knew that was the future. Dad's business had been punch cards. The business model they had was this punch card and the sorting machines that went with it. That was how you inputted data. That is a punch card. Well, from down in the ranks at IBM one day, there's a guy named Max Kami. He was an engineer, and he proposed the adoption of magnetic ink character recognition. They've been developed, I think, out at Stanford Research Center. It's a way to print all those squiggly numbers on the bottom of your check with a magnetic ink that a machine could read. But his boss said, hey, wait a minute, we're in the punch card business. We don't want to get involved with this stuff. We're in the punch card business. And Max couldn't stop himself. And after the third warning, he wrote a letter to Mr. Watson himself. And a few days later, two men appeared at his office and said, bring your things. And he said, am I fired? He said, no, bring your things. And they went to see Mr. Watson, and a couple hours later, maybe less than that, he left with a staff of 32 people and was told to go make it happen. And for those of you who are historians, you may know that during this period of time, when people at IBM wanted to stay with punch cards, GE was developing computers. When IBM finally woke up and realized that magnetic ink character recognition was the future, they jumped on it, and a few months later, GE was out of the computing business and never returned. Automatic check processing became a priority for the company at that time, and they got an unassailable lead in EDP and have never looked back. So what was happening here? He saw technology convergence. He saw the threat to his business. His boss was complacent, comfortable perhaps, maybe just ignorant. But Camby saw something more. And in fact, I'm sure he saw his own livelihood going down the drain. He was pretty courageous, I think. He showed convictions. He showed some leadership. He showed some decisiveness. And this was a case of leadership from down below, in my opinion. Pretty dramatic, in fact. What do you think you'd have done? Same circumstances. You got something like that now? Wouldn't be surprised if some of you do. Think about how you're going to handle it. Think about how you're going to make sure your company's ready for the future. Well, when the transistor arrived, Watson didn't really hesitate. He invested heavily. They put $5 billion into developing the IBM 360 that obsoleted everything that IBM made up to that point. Now, there's some courage. Some people thought he was crazy, but only briefly. When IBM rolled out the IBM 360, the future was clear, and the rest was history. One of the things that we've pondered in our Leadership Academy is the statement here. Is failure to act the greater risk that you take personally and to a company? I think it is. What might have happened at IBM if somebody had made those courageous decisions? Can you think of a time when you should have been more decisive? Didn't? Do you feel like you can take initiative in your company today and from your current position? I hope you do. Because if our leaders are not allowing you to get in a position where your ideas are vetted, then we're failing as leaders, aren't we? Right? We got the brain power of a lot of people in this company. During that time of Watson's leadership, it had really become a company with the courage of its convictions. And Watson himself made the comment that things only happen when people are willing to put their head on the block. He made the equally important point that leading yourself is the most important thing you do. Leading others is important. Leading yourself, having the right values, the right ethics, the right direction, right convictions, very, very important. Peter Drucker, the same Peter Drucker, studied that culture very, very extensively, and he talked about courage. He said, when you see a successful business, someone made a courageous decision at some point in time. And I can walk you through any company I know of, and maybe some you know of, and point that out to you, that there was some juncture in the road where somebody made a very courageous decision and said, let's go, we can do this, I can lead this team, we can make it happen. And he saw that business courage coming as a product of experience and confidence, the kind of things that we want our leadership in this company at all levels to earn over time. Well, one of my heroes, you notice that in the outset I said I'd been a telephone lineman once upon a time, is this guy. He's CEO of Verizon today. He has decided, with what I call high school logic, that they got to get out of the copper business and put in fiber optic. So they're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars to put in fiber optic all across their territories. And the press is all over him, one time saying this is never going to work, and other times saying, wow, Verizon's really doing a great job. Many people feel Verizon is one of the best service providers today. People have Verizon service at home say it's the fastest service they can get. Are they going to succeed? We don't know. This gamble will play out over many, many years. But I can tell you for sure that if Verizon was still trying to move data around on copper to the home, they would be out of business today. So here's a guy that I say applied high school logic and then drove his whole organization. Really a great example of leadership. What about this guy again, Steve Jobs? Where's he leading this company? Everybody knows who Jeff Bezos is, I think, the CEO at Amazon. Brilliant guy, built a great business model about disintermediating the distribution of books and selling them over the internet. He saw the threat from electronic reading. He moved quickly, developed the Kindle. He led that change, and he's obsoleting his own business model because he has the vision that says it's going to go electronic sooner or later. And that commitment has allowed him to really rally his people to develop some fantastic products and services. Yes, there are challenges. Does Apple's plan top Amazon's? Don't think so. The iPad was out for 1 week when Amazon announced their plan to sell books on the iPad. Amazon's in the business of selling books, selling the content of those books. That's what they do. The actual media that it comes on is interesting, but they only provided the starting point for this. Now we'll see tablets go like crazy, and they'll still be there selling books. Disintermediation. Disintermediation is not a word easy to say, but it's a strategy for eliminating the middleman. And as you'll see here in just a minute, it happens. The music industry was the first one, right? iPod especially accelerated this, where you eliminated the post-production, you eliminated manufacturing, eliminated marketing, sales, distribution, and certainly eliminated the physical retail store. I can go log on in my hotel room and download whatever music I want, right? It goes onto my iPod. So patterns formed. Apple has a strategy. Its leadership is saying, if it's just bits, web distribution wins. If it's just bits. I mean, don't take it to a retail store, right? It's going to go over the web. And a lot of the incumbent leaders can't change, and Apple knows that. They know that there's going to be countless people in these other industries fighting because they want to preserve what they do. So if you look at what's going to get eliminated here, I mean, obviously the photo stores didn't enjoy going out of business, right? So those incumbents want to fight. And come out here and look at the publishers in the newspaper industry. They don't want to leave either. But one by one, digital distribution is eliminating them. That is the true Apple strategy, by the way. That's the Amazon strategy as well. This is one of those rare times when you see one leader, in this case Steve Jobs, have such a huge impact on the world. Well, can we make it sustainable? You know, others have clearly faulted. Anybody remember Motorola and the trials and tribulations of Motorola? So my story here is a little bit old, but it continues. Process improvement. Very simple thing. All you got to do is reduce your variation, right, and center the process, and boom, you're in good shape. That's how it works. I came out of the semiconductor world doing manufacturing, so I know that's how we work. That's the basic underpinning, right? And your yield will continue to increase until the product's replaced, which is usually a couple years. That's how the semiconductor business worked in the time that I was in it. But what we found is the Japanese pursued it with a lot greater vigor. In the 1980s, Motorola was having a few issues of capacity, the nice problem, where they had to find new capacity. And they got themselves an object lesson. And this story was told to me by the guy who was the manager of memory for Motorola at the time. At that time, they had a real capacity crunch, and so they farmed out their wafer production. And a wafer can be in different sizes. Back then, I think it was a 4-inch wafer and had about 800 memory chips on it, 800 die as we call it. And they farmed it out to a Japanese company. And their yield had been running at Motorola about 55%, okay, which wasn't too bad, and it would probably increase a little bit and then be replaced by the next generation model. So the event I'm going to talk about here is the testing of the first chips they outsourced to a little company in Japan. So they found a company in Japan that specialized in doing wafer processing, and they did complete products, but they would do wafer processing. And Motorola farmed it out, and the first tray of 10 came in, their prototypes, if you will. And Tom was in his office. Tom Falesi was his name. The phone rang, and it was a guy down the lab saying, "Hey, Tom, I just tested the first wafer that came in here from Japan." And he said, "And all the die are good." "What do you mean?" "No, every single die on here is good." He said, "What are you talking about?" "They're good. You better come down here." And Tom said, "Well, I got a meeting to go to, and I'll be down as soon as I can." Well, Tom went off to his meeting. He said halfway through the meeting, he's getting a page. And he goes and picks up the phone. It's the technician saying, "Tom, the second one's all good too." And they kind of said, "Well, maybe they're just showing off. They're sending us their good stuff," and so forth. Anyhow, Tom went down later in the day, and they tested all 10 wafers. There wasn't a bad die on the wafer, which is almost hard to believe. Almost hard to believe. Then he looked at the serial numbers on the die and realized they were all sequential. They hadn't cherry-picked these. They weren't making any bad product. Motorola had never seen that in the semiconductor business. Neither had I, by the way. But what it meant was, if you tuned your processes up well enough, you couldn't make anything bad. And that's what they were encountering. And Motorola realized this was a sea change for them. The process, the quality requirement the bar had been raised. They understood that they were no longer going to be competitive. They had to do something. And they took what I call the leap of faith, right? That awakening had come. There were a lot of other things going on in the company at the time, a lot of threats in Motorola's business. The CEO committed. He built a whole new organization around what we call Six Sigma. Those who got it stayed. Those who didn't go were gone. They really took a pretty harsh view of those who weren't willing to get on board. He was building to future-proof his company. a lot of great processes put in place. But you know what? Business is awful cruel, particularly if you're out on the bleeding edge of technology like you are in the communications business. It can be cruel and very swift. They brought out, you remember the Razor line, that wonderful line of products? But then they stumbled, gave up the lead to Samsung and Nokia, then Apple's iPhone, and they became a big loser in just a few years' time. It was very hard to sustain. The media piled on, and it's just been bloody. Well, they got a new leader now. He's been there for 3 years, coming along, Mr. J. But he got no slack, believe me. And it all came down to talking about leadership, leadership, leadership. And you see that in the headlines I'm showing here. But he put some very good processes in place. They've had progress. But in the eyes of investors, Motorola really had to start all over again. So Motorola spun off the phone business to refocus on their core communications business. There's now a thing called Motorola Mobility. And Motorola Mobility turned to Google to get the operating system. Now, this is very interesting, and I'm just giving you this because it has some historic importance. You'll see how this plays out over time. The phones are selling pretty well, but it may well be that Motorola gave up their future to Google because it's basically the Google operating system with their electronics underneath, and you can get that from a lot of different players out there. So we'll see. The headline this week is that the folks at Google woke up and said, you know what, people are starting to play with our Android system. We don't like that. Here's how you will do it. So Google's in the phone business. Everyone else is making hardware and distributing it. So we wish them luck. We hope they can future-proof their company going forward, but it's going to be hard from this point. And what about Sony? There's a great name, right? Everybody knows Sony. Great company, been struggling very badly. You know, once upon a time, they were a second-tier brand in Japan. They weren't really known as a quality house. Not at all, in fact. But they wanted to enter the U.S. TV market. They'd already had a success with their small portable radios. They wanted to get in the TV business.